A widow saves a pregnant woman lost in the forest until something unexpected happens. Leave a comment telling me what you thought of this story, give it a rating from 0 to 10, and tell me what city you're watching from. I really want to know if you enjoyed my story, and I'd love to get to know you better, so subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on you. The smell of wet earth came through the window before the rain even arrived. I was sitting on the porch when I felt it, that heavy, loaded air that announces a storm in the backcountry. I didn't get up. I just sat there, watching the sky darken too fast to be just the end of the afternoon. November in Millhaven is like that. The heat burns your skin during the day, and at night the rain falls, as if the world is in a hurry to wash something away. I wasn't expecting anything from that night. I don't expect anything from any night, to be honest. It's been 2 years since Robert passed, and since then my life has turned into a repetition of identical days. I wake up, make coffee, look out the window, tidy the cabin, read something, write in my diary, sleep. It's not sad, it's just empty. The kind of empty you learn to carry because there's nowhere to put it down. The rain started slowly, then came down all at once. I was just about to close the window when I heard a strange noise outside. It wasn't the wind beating against the trees nor a branch snapping. It was different. It sounded like someone dragging themselves across the ground. I grabbed the battery-powered flashlight that hangs on the nail on the wall and opened the door. The weak light barely reached 3 meters ahead, but it was enough for me to see the shape collapse near the fence. My first thought was that it was an injured animal. It had happened before. Once I found a raccoon that had been bitten by a dog. I took care of it until it recovered. But when I got closer, I saw it wasn't an animal. It was a woman. She was face down in the mud, the rain beating against her back, her hair plastered to her face. Her feet were bare, covered in cuts, and her belly, my God, her belly, round, enormous, as if she were carrying the weight of the entire world inside her. I stopped. The flashlight trembled in my hand. I could have gone back inside. I could have called someone. I could have pretended I hadn't seen anything, but I couldn't. Something about that fallen body, that womb rising and falling slowly with her breathing, pulled me forward. I knelt in the mud beside her and carefully turned her face. Young, very young, eyes closed, mouth slightly open, a clean cut at the corner of her forehead. I placed my hand on her neck and felt her pulse. Weak, but there. Alive. "Hey," I called softly. "Hey, can you hear me?" She didn't respond. I took her by the shoulders and tried to lift her. She was much heavier than I'd imagined. The rain kept falling, and I was already soaked, my knees sinking into the mud, my breath short. I dragged her to the porch, 1 inch at a time, stopping to catch my breath, my heart pounding too hard in my chest. When I finally managed to get her inside, I closed the door and leaned against it, my legs weak. The woman lay unconscious on the living room floor, wet, dirty, vulnerable in a way that hurt to look at. I went to get blankets, towels, a basin of warm water. I cleaned her face slowly, wiped the mud from her arms, from her cut feet. I wrapped her in blankets and put a pillow under her head. Only then did I get a proper look at her. Her face was swollen, her lips cracked, her nails dirty with earth, as if she had dug the ground with her bare hands. And a purple mark on her left wrist, old, already faded, but still visible. I sat on the floor beside her, my back against the wall, listening to the rain outside and her heavy breathing. I didn't know who she was. I didn't know where she came from. I didn't know what had happened. But I knew she needed help. And I, for some reason I still can't explain, decided to give it. She woke up in the middle of the night. I was in the rocking chair by the window, trying to read an old book I'd already read 3 times. I heard a low moan and looked over. She was sitting up on the floor, eyes wide open, one hand on her belly and the other gripping the blanket. "Where am I?" Her voice came out hoarse, trembling. "In my home," I answered, without moving from the chair. I didn't want to startle her. You were lying outside. I brought you in. She looked around, confused, breathing too fast. Her eyes were dark, deep, full of fear. Are you hurt? I asked. She shook her head, but she didn't seem sure. I need to leave, she said, trying to stand. You won't make it, I replied, and it was the truth. The road is impassable with this rain, and you're far too weak. She stopped, looked at her own cut feet, and collapsed back onto the floor. She began to cry. It wasn't crying from pain. It was the crying of someone too exhausted to hold anything together. I didn't say a word. I just got up, warmed up some leftover soup in the pot, poured it into a mug, and held it out to her. She took it with both hands, as if it were the most precious thing in the world, and drank slowly. What's your name? I asked. She took a while to answer. Melissa. I'm Julia. She nodded, but said nothing more. She drank the soup to the last drop, handed back the mug, and she closed her eyes. I went back to the rocking chair and stayed there, watching the rain hit the window, thinking about how life sometimes places people at your door without warning, without explanation, without giving you time to choose whether you want them there or not. In the days that followed, Melissa slept a lot. She would wake up, eat something, and go back to sleep. I didn't ask anything. I just took care of her. I washed her clothes, applied ointment to her wounded feet, changed the bandages. She barely spoke. She only thanked me quietly and looked away. The cabin is small. 2 rooms, a bathroom outside, a makeshift kitchen in one corner. There's no way 2 people can live there without running into each other. And silences, when they go on too long, become heavy. On the 3rd day, I noticed something. Melissa froze every time she heard a noise outside. A branch snapping, the wind hitting the door, the distant sound of an engine on the road. She would go completely still, eyes wide, breath caught. I knew that look. I'd seen it in wounded animals, in people who'd been beaten too hard by life. It's the look of someone who's afraid of being found. On the night of the 4th day, the storm came back, stronger than the first. The wind tore a shingle off the porch, and the rain came in through the gap. I had to drag the mattress to the other side of the room, away from the leak. Melissa helped as best she could, breathing with difficulty. When we finally got everything sorted, we sat on the floor, wet and exhausted. That's when she started to talk. Not much, just enough. I have nowhere to go, she said, looking at her own hands. You don't have to go anywhere right now, I replied. You don't even know me. I don't need to. She looked at me in a strange way, as if she were trying to figure out whether I was real or just another illusion born from exhaustion. Why did you help me? She asked. I thought before answering. Not because I didn't know, but because the answer was simpler than it seemed. And sometimes the simplest things are the hardest to say. Because you needed it, I said. And I was here. She began to cry again, and this time I let her, because there's a kind of crying you can't console. You can only bear witness to it. That night, while Melissa slept, I went to the drawer where I keep my diary. I picked up the pen and wrote, "Today, I brought a stranger into my home. I don't know who she is. I don't know what she's done. I don't know if I did the right thing. But when I looked at her lying on the ground, all I could think was, what if that were me?" I closed the notebook, turned off the light, and fell asleep to the sound of rain on the roof, not knowing that in the days ahead, my entire life was about to be turned upside down. On the 5th day, Melissa began to talk more. Not much. She still carried that way of weighing every word before letting it go, but enough for me to realize she wasn't from around here. Her accent was different, more drawn out, the kind you hear from someone who grew up in a bigger city. She helped me wash the breakfast dishes, slowly, holding her belly with one hand and scrubbing the plates with the other. "Do you live out here alone?" she asked, looking through the window at the woodland surrounding the cabin. "I do," I answered, drying a mug. "For 2 years now. And before? Before I lived in town with my husband." She didn't ask anything more, but I felt the weight of the silence. We kept washing dishes. The sun was beating down hard outside, the heat already rising from the ground, and the smell of pine came in on the wind. That afternoon it happened. I was folding the clothes I'd washed for Melissa, an old pair of jeans, a thin fabric blouse, when a photograph fell from the jacket pocket. It landed face down on the wood floor. I picked it up without thinking, turned it over, and the world stopped. It was Robert, younger, his hair still dark, smiling that wide smile he had, and beside him, Melissa, his hand on her shoulder, the two of them looking at the camera as if the future were a promise and not a threat. I turned the photo over. On the back, a date written in pen. March, 3 years ago. 3 years. 1 year before Robert passed. My hand trembled. I put the photograph back in the jacket pocket, folded the clothes slowly, put everything away. I breathed deeply. I said nothing. I couldn't say anything, because if I opened my mouth at that moment, I didn't know what would come out. Melissa was sitting in the rocking chair, looking at her belly, stroking the curve as if she were having a silent conversation with whoever was inside. She didn't see. She didn't notice. I went outside, walked to the backyard, sat under the shade of the old oak tree and stayed there staring at nothing. Robert, my Robert. How many things didn't I know about him? How many lives did he live that I never saw? I went back inside an hour later. Melissa had fallen asleep in the chair. I went to the diary, picked up the pen, and wrote a single line. Sometimes the truth arrives before you're ready for it. I didn't confront Melissa that day, nor the next. I needed to understand first. I needed to gather the pieces before. I've always been like that, too methodical for my own good. On the 6th day, I went into Millhaven for the first time in months. I needed to buy supplies, medicine for Melissa, and I also wanted to feel the pulse of the town, to know if anyone was looking for her. The town was the same, small, warm, dusty. The same dirt roads, the same houses with wooden porches, the same smell of food drifting from windows. But the people looked at me differently. Some averted their eyes, others pretended not to see me. I went into the pharmacy. Dorothy, the owner, had always been kind to me. But this time, she tensed up when I asked for prenatal vitamins. "Is that for someone staying at your place?" she asked, her tone drier than usual. "It is," I replied, giving no details. She wrapped the medicine in silence, charged me, handed it over. She didn't smile. I left there with a knot in my stomach. At the bakery, the same thing. At the general store, the owner barely spoke to me. It was only on the way out of town, when I stopped to drink some water in the shade of a tree, that Helen appeared. Helen was the retired nurse, probably in her early 70s, who had lived in Millhaven her whole life. She knew everyone, and everyone knew her. "Julia!" Everyone knew her. "Julia!" she called, approaching slowly, limping because of her bad hip. "Helen!" I greeted her. She looked around, as if checking whether anyone was nearby, and then lowered her voice. "People are talking about you in town." "I know," I replied. "I noticed. Frank's been spreading word that you're hiding a troubled young woman who tried to break into properties around here." I felt the ground give way. Frank? Frank, the rancher, the one who was Robert's business partner. I knew Frank, a big man, a thick voice, a smile that came too easily. Robert never liked him much, but he did business with him because that was the way of things. After Robert passed, Frank disappeared from my life. He never came to visit, never asked if I needed anything. Why is he talking about me? I asked. Helen hesitated. I'm not entirely sure, but he's been asking around if anyone saw a pregnant woman passing through on the road. And when he found out you'd gone to the pharmacy to buy prenatal medicine, he started spreading this story. Someone needs to go out there and help you. I felt the fear crawl up my spine. Helen, I don't know this woman very well yet, but she isn't dangerous. She's scared. I don't know this woman very well yet, but she isn't dangerous. She's scared, hurt. She needs help. Helen looked at me deeply, as if deciding whether to believe me or not. Julia, Frank doesn't make up stories for no reason. If he's looking for that woman, it's because she knows something, or saw something, and people like Frank don't like witnesses. She squeezed my arm, turned, and walked away, limping down the dirt road. I went back to the cabin with my head full. When I arrived, Melissa was awake, sitting on the porch, looking out at the woodland. Everything okay? She asked when she saw me. Fine, I lied. She didn't press, but I knew I needed to talk to her. I needed to know the truth, because now it wasn't just about Robert, it was about Frank, and if Frank was after her, things were more serious than I'd imagined. That night, after dinner, I sat in the chair across from Melissa and breathed deeply. Melissa, I need to ask you something. She looked up, the fear returning to her face. Did you know my husband? I asked directly. She froze, her lips trembled, her hands tightened around the edge of the blanket. How do you know? She whispered. I found a photograph. She closed her eyes. A tear rolled down, and then slowly she began to speak. I met him 3 years ago. I was working at an office in the city. He came in to sort out some paperwork. We talked, and afterward, we kept talking. You had a relationship? It wasn't a question. We did, she confirmed, her voice breaking. For almost a year. I felt my chest tighten, but I didn't look away. And this baby. She placed her hand on her belly, protective. It's his. The silence that followed was too heavy to fit in that small room. When I found out I was pregnant, I told him. He said he'd take care of it, that he'd talk to me properly, that he'd do the right thing. But before he could, he passed. Tears ran down her face now, without stopping. I was left alone. I didn't know what to do. I thought about disappearing, about not telling anyone. But when the baby was born, I'd need to register, so I went looking for documents. And that's when I found out. Found out what? I asked, my voice tense. That Frank had forged documents tying Robert to a massive debt. Documents that would make you lose everything. And that would put me in the middle of a scheme I never had any part in. The world spun. Frank did that? He did. And when I found out, I tried to leave, but he found me. He told me that if I said anything, he'd take care of me and the baby. He told me I'd have nowhere to run. And you ran anyway. I did, because I had no choice. She looked at me, her eyes red, her voice a thread. I didn't want to hurt you, Julia. I didn't come here on purpose. I was just running. And when I woke up here, and you were so kind to me, I couldn't say anything. I just couldn't. I sat there, looking at that woman who was carrying my husband's child, who was carrying secrets that could destroy me, and who at the same time was just as broken as I was. And then I did the only thing I could. I got up, walked over to her, and sat down beside her. We'll sort this out, I said firmly, but right now you need to rest. Melissa looked at me as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Why? She asked. Why are you still helping me? I thought about the answer. I thought about Robert. I thought about the child about to be born. I thought about myself, alone in that cabin, carrying a grief that would never fully end. Because we're all that's left of him, I replied, and that has to count for something. On the seventh day, Victor appeared on the road. I saw him from the window, tall, broad shoulders, dusty cap, walking slowly along the edge of the woodland like someone following a trail. I recognized him immediately. He was Frank's eldest son, the one who worked the ranch and carried the family name like a medal. I turned off the living room light. I signaled for Melissa to stay quiet. She was sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall, her hand on her belly, her eyes wide with fear. We stayed there, still, listening to the silence outside. Victor walked straight past. He didn't knock, he didn't shout. He just looked at the cabin, lingered for a few seconds, and continued down the road. But I knew he had seen it. I knew he'd be back. I knew time was running out. When the sound of his footsteps faded, Melissa let out the breath she'd been holding. "He's looking for me," she said, her voice shaking. "I know. If he finds me..." "He won't," I cut in firmly. "Not yet." But inside, I was afraid too. Because now it wasn't just Frank spreading lies in town. It was Frank sending his son to patrol, and that meant he was in a hurry. People in a hurry make mistakes, and mistakes hurt people. That afternoon, I made a decision. I needed help. I couldn't face Frank alone. I had no power, no influence, nothing but an old cabin in the middle of the countryside, and a word that no one in town was going to believe. But I had one thing Frank didn't expect. I had the truth. On the 8th day, I went back to Millhaven. This time I didn't go to the pharmacy or the store. I went straight to Helen's house. I knocked, waited. She opened the door, looked both ways, and pulled me inside. "You're out of your mind coming back here," she said, closing the door quickly. "I need your help." "Julia, I already warned you. Frank is dangerous. If he finds out I'm on your side..." "He won't find out," I interrupted, "but I need evidence. I need something that shows what he did with Robert's assets." Helen looked at me, hesitant. Then she sighed deeply, went to the bedroom, and came back with a yellowed envelope. "Robert gave me this before he passed," she said, placing the envelope in my hands. "He asked me to only open it if things went wrong. I never opened it. I didn't think it was my decision." I took the envelope, felt its weight. My fingers trembled. "Open it," said Helen. "I think the time has come." I opened it slowly. Inside was a letter, handwritten, in Robert's handwriting. I read it in silence, each word burning more than the last. He knew. He knew what Frank was doing. He knew about the forged documents. He knew the partnership between them was a trap. And he had tried to get out, but Frank had pressured him. Robert didn't go into detail. He only said that things got too heavy, and that he tried to do the right thing, but it may have been too late. At the end of the letter, he wrote, "If something happens to me, Julia needs to know that Frank is not who he appears to be. He will try to take everything from her. Don't let him. There are documents kept with Thomas, the attorney. He knows where they are. Use them if you need to." I folded the letter, put it back in the envelope, looked at Helen. "Thomas," I repeated, "the attorney who works for Frank." Helen nodded. "The very same." I left her house with the letter tucked in my pocket and my head full of plans. I needed those documents, but Thomas was never going to hand them over willingly. He owed too many favors to Frank. That's when I thought of Amber. Amber was the young midwife who had come to the cabin when Melissa nearly went into early labor a few days before. She had looked at Melissa in a strange way, as if she recognized something. And before leaving, she had warned me that Frank knew where I was. I needed to talk to her. I found Amber in the town square, sitting on a bench, drinking from a juice box. I sat down beside her without asking. "I need your help," I said directly. She looked at me, startled. "Julia, I can't get involved in this." "You're already involved," I cut in. "You warned me about Frank. You saw Melissa. You know something's wrong." Amber looked down, fidgeting with the straw on her juice. I worked at Thomas's office. About 2 years ago, I was an intern. I filed documents, organized drawers. I know where he keeps the things he doesn't want anyone to find. Can you get those documents? She looked up, terrified. If I do that, I lose everything. My job, my reputation. If you don't, Melissa loses her life, I replied hard, and I lose everything Robert left behind. Amber breathed deeply. She was silent for a long time. Then she nodded slowly. I'll try. 2 days later, Amber appeared at the cabin. It was night. She was trembling, sweating, clutching a brown envelope under her arm. I got them, she said, handing over the envelope. I opened it right there. Inside, copies of contracts, fake receipts, documents signed in Robert's handwriting, but which any expert would see were forgeries. Everything pointed to Frank. Everything exposed the scheme. I looked at Amber, moved. Thank you. She nodded, still nervous. What are you going to do now? I'm going to end this. On the 10th day, Melissa went into labor, for real this time. It started in the early hours of the morning, with weak pains that grew stronger. She cried out, held my hand, breathed deeply, trying to stay in control. I didn't have a landline at the cabin. My cell phone only caught signal at the top of the ridge, 300 meters away, and the rain had come back. The road was blocked again, mud up to the knee. I had no choice. I climbed the ridge in the rain, slipped twice, tore the skin off my arm on a barbed wire fence, but I made it to the top and called Amber. She picked up on the second ring. I'm on my way, she said, and hung up. I ran back down, my knee aching, my breath short, heart beating out of rhythm. When I got back to the cabin, Melissa was lying on the floor, crying, holding her own belly. Hold on, I asked, kneeling beside her. He's almost here. Amber arrived half an hour later, soaking wet, carrying a cloth bag full of supplies. She worked through the entire night. I held Melissa's hand, wiped the sweat from her forehead, repeated words that I'm not even sure made sense, just so she'd know she wasn't alone. The baby was born at dawn, a boy, small but strong. He cried loudly, filling the cabin with life. Amber placed him in Melissa's arms. She looked at her son, tears streaming, and smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. I stood against the wall, watching the scene, and felt something break inside me. Not anger, not sadness, something else. Something that felt like acceptance, or perhaps relief. I went outside, sat on the porch, and cried alone. I cried for Robert. I cried for myself. I cried for that child who had just been born and who carried the blood of a man I loved and would never fully know. When I went back inside, Amber was packing up her things. She looked at me, serious. Frank knows you're here, Julia. Victor saw you climbing the ridge last night. I know, I answered. He'll come. I know. Amber hesitated, then picked up her bag and left without looking back. Melissa was nursing the baby, quiet, exhausted, but whole. She looked at me. What do we do now? She asked. I picked up the envelope with the documents, put it in my pocket, and looked back at her. Now we fight. On the 12th day, Frank knocked on the door. He didn't send Victor. He came himself. I was washing clothes in the yard basin when I heard the truck pulling up in front of the cabin. The loud engine, the dust rising, the smell of diesel in the hot air. I dried my hands on a cloth, breathed deeply, and went to the front. Frank was standing on the porch, hat on his head, arms folded, that wide smile that never reached his eyes. Julia, he greeted as if we were old friends. Frank, I replied coolly, came to see how you're doing. It's been a while since we talked. I have nothing to talk to you about. He laughed, but the laugh sounded hollow. I heard you've got a woman staying here, pregnant. Or rather, she's had the baby by now, hasn't she? I didn't respond. I just looked at him. This woman, he continued, his tone growing harder, is causing trouble, Julia. She's spreading lies, trying to hurt me, and I can't let that happen. She's not spreading anything, I replied. She's here taking care of her son, that's all. Son of who, Julia? He asked, taking a step closer. You know whose baby that is? I do. And you still let her stay? Still. Frank shook his head, as if he couldn't believe it. You were always too good for your own good. Robert used to say that. He said you had a soft heart, that you trusted everybody. Robert said a lot of things, I replied firmly, and you used that against him. The smile left Frank's face. Watch what you say, Julia. Or what? You'll threaten me too, like you threatened her? He took another step. We were face to face. You don't know anything. I know more than you think. I pulled the envelope from my pocket, opened it, showed him the documents. He looked at them, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Where did you get those? He asked, his voice tense. Doesn't matter. What matters is that I have them now, and I'm going to use them. Frank breathed deeply, clenched his fists, but didn't advance. He knew that if he touched me, things would get worse. He turned, walked to the truck, stopped before getting in. You'll regret this, Julia, he said without looking back. I've regretted many things in my life, Frank, but standing up to you won't be one of them. He got into the truck and drove off, kicking up dust along the road. I went back inside, trembling. Melissa was sitting on the floor, the baby in her lap, her eyes full of tears. He'll come back, she said. He will, I confirmed. But when he does, we won't be alone. On the 13th day, I went looking for Walter. He was a retired journalist, living in a small house at the end of the main street in Millhaven, who for years had been trying to prove that Frank wasn't who he pretended to be. Everyone in town knew it. Nobody took it seriously. I knocked on the door. Walter opened it, recognized me, frowned. Julia, what are you doing here? I came to give you a story, I replied. He hesitated, then let me in. The house smelled of old coffee and paper. There were stacks of newspapers everywhere, clippings pinned to the wall, notes in worn notebooks. I sat in the chair he offered and put the documents on the table. This proves that Frank forged contracts, diverted assets, and used Robert's death to cover his tracks. Walter picked up the papers, put on his glasses, and read slowly. His expression shifted from distrust to surprise, from surprise to something like relief. Do you know what this means? He asked, looking at me. I know. It means he's going down. It means you're going to become a target. I already am. I have nothing left to lose. Walter was silent for a time, then nodded. I'll take this to the county prosecutor. The sheriff here owes favors to Frank. That won't work, but the county prosecutor is different. Do whatever needs to be done, I asked. Just do it fast. He tucked the documents into a folder and looked at me with respect. Robert was lucky to have you. I didn't answer. I just left. On the 14th day, the news started to spread. Walter had taken the documents to the prosecutor, and the prosecutor had opened an investigation. Frank was called in to give a statement. The whole town was talking. Some believed it. Others thought it was a setup. Sandra, Frank's wife, appeared at the cabin that afternoon. I hadn't expected her. She had never come here before. She was a small woman, graying hair pulled back in a bun, fine hands, a tired face. May I come in? She asked politely. You may, I replied, opening the door. She came in, looked around, saw Melissa sitting with the baby in her lap. She stopped, looked at the child, and something in her face softened. I came to apologize, she said, her voice low, for everything Frank did. You don't need to apologize for him, I replied. I do, she insisted, because I knew. Not everything, But I knew something was wrong, and I pretended not to see. I pretended for so long it became the truth. She sat in the chair, sighed deeply. When Walter showed the documents to the prosecutor, Frank came home and broke everything. He shouted, swore, said everyone had turned against him. And I, for the first time in 30 years, looked at him and said, "You did this to yourself." Sandra looked at me, her eyes red. "He's not a bad man, Julia. He just became..." Sandra looked at me, her eyes red. "He's not a bad man, Julia. He just became greedy, and greed changes you in ways you can't come back from." "I know," I replied. "Robert changed too. Not in the same way, but he did." She nodded, stood up, and left in silence. On the 16th day, Frank was formally charged. The news came over the community radio station: diversion of assets, document forgery, coercion. The list was long. Victor, his son, was in shock. He couldn't believe his father had done it. Sandra, on the other hand, gave an interview saying she supported the investigation. The town had never... She asked. "Not yet," I replied, "but it's close." On the 17th day, Helen appeared at the cabin. She brought a cornbread wrapped in a dish towel. "I figured you two deserved something sweet," she said, handing it over. The three of us sat on the porch, eating cornbread, drinking coffee, listening to the wind in the trees. The baby slept in Melissa's lap. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. "Are you going to stay here?" I asked Melissa. She shook her head. "I'm going to my sister's, in the city. Start over." "That's the right thing to do," I agreed. "And you?" I looked at the woodland, the cabin, at everything that had been my prison and my refuge at the same time. "I'm staying. This is where I belong." Helen smiled, touched my hand. "Robert would have been proud of you."